Good morning, Year 7. I hope you are well. We are halfway through the week, so well done for your hard work so far. Today, we are going to be looking at spelling, punctuation, and grammar, and we are going to be focusing on commas. So, could you please pause the video, copy down the title, the date, and the learning objective. Press play when you have those three things written down, please. Okay, if you're back, that means you have those three things on the screen written down and you are ready to complete our Do Now task. Today, I want you to have a go at copying the sentences that use commas correctly. Remember that when we see a comma when we read, it means that we need to have a little pause. So it might be useful for you to read the sentences aloud and see if the pause makes sense where the comma is. There are only two sentences here that use commas correctly. Pause the video and copy the two sentences that use commas correctly now, please. Okay, if you're back, that means you have chosen the sentences that use commas correctly and you are ready to make your purple pen corrections. As always, give it a tick if you got it right. If you got it wrong, that's all right. Just make sure you write the correct answer. So, these were the two sentences that use commas correctly. I went shopping to buy milk, bread, eggs, cheese, and coffee. And the commas are there. And we'll talk about why commas are used there in a little while. And then we have this one. After eating 5 scoops of chocolate ice cream, Morgan felt sick. And there's our comma there. Again, I'll tell you about why that comma is used there in a little while. Before we do that, pause the video and make any purple pen corrections that you need to, please. Okay, so let's learn a little bit about how commas are used. There are quite a few ways that commas are used, but we're only going to focus on a couple today. So, commas are used to separate items in a list. For example, on my desk there is a diary, a pen, a pair of scissors and a ruler. As you can see here, there's a list of items and they are separated with commas. I went to the shop and bought some apples, a bag of crisps and a magazine. Again, separate with comma. And the excited girl packed her shorts, t-shirt, costume and sunglasses. Again, items in the list separated with a comma. So, what I would like you to do, you're going to copy the below sentences, you're going to add the commas in the right places and you're going to remove the commas that are in the wrong places. So, these sentences all contain lists, and we've just learned that commas are used to separate items in a list. So, you need to add the commas in the right places, so to separate the items in the list, and you need to remove the commas that are in the wrong places. There are a couple examples where a comma isn't used correctly and it isn't used to separate items in the list. It's your job to take that out. Pause the video and press play when you have completed this task, please. Okay, if you're back, that means you have copied the sentences, added commas in the right place and removed the incorrect commas. Now it's time to make our purple pen corrections. Give it a tick if you got it right. If you got it wrong, please make sure you put the commas in the correct place in purple pen. So, the packet contained red, blue, purple, green and yellow felt tips. We have lists there and we have the items separated with a comma. At the top of the league were Birmingham, Manchester United, Crewe and Aston Villa. So we have the commas there. Junaid took the plates, bowls and cutlery back to the kitchen. We have the comma there. Britain is made up of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And the girls love playing rugby, football, cricket and golf. It's important to notice at this point that the last item in the list isn't separated with a comma. It doesn't look like this. The last item is always separated with and normally. If it was only 2 items in the list, for example, this one, if it was Sinead took the plates, bowls and cutlery back to the kitchen, there's only 2 items, so we wouldn't need a comma there. We can just separate them with and. Let me just rub that out so you have a clear screen, and you can pause the video and double check your work, making sure that all of the commas in your book match the ones on the screen. Pause the video and make any corrections that you need to now, please. Okay, so another way that commas are used, they are used to separate a main clause and a subordinate clause. Now, you might have heard these words before in primary school, but it's important that we can recap. So, in some sentences, there's a main clause and a subordinate clause. The main clause always makes sense on its own. It is a sentence on its own. For example, I like my brown sweater is a main clause. It makes sense on its own. A subordinate clause, however, doesn't make sense on its own. The subordinate clause needs the main clause in order to make sense. And the main clause and the subordinate clause are always separated with a comma. So let's have a look at these examples. If I get the next question right, I will win the quiz. Before I went to the party, I bought my cousin a birthday present. After the fire alarm went off, the students walked to the assembly point. So let me highlight the main clause. I will win the quiz. Makes sense on its own. I bought my cousin a birthday present. Makes sense on its own. And the students walked to the assembly point. Makes sense on its own. All of those sentences have a subject of the sentence, so who it's about, and they also have a verb, and that means it's a full, grammatically correct sentence. Now, let's look at the subordinate clause. Let's grab a highlighter in a different colour. Let's choose green, our subordinate clause. Remember, it doesn't make sense on its own. So, for example, if I get the next question right, if someone just came up to you in the street and said, if I get the next question right, you'd be like, yes, what will happen if you get the next question right? That doesn't make sense on its own. Same with before I went to the party. If someone said to you, before I went to the party, you'd be waiting to hear what happened before they went to the party. It doesn't make sense on its own. And same with after the fire alarm went off. If someone said to you, after the fire alarm went off, you'd be like, okay, what happened after the fire alarm went off? You need to tell me. So those are the subordinate and the main clauses, and they are separated with the comma in the middle. Remember, the comma signifies that there is a break. So if I get the next question right, pause, I will win the quiz, and so on and so forth. So let's have a go at identifying main clauses and subordinate clauses. So what I would like you to do is I would like you to highlight the main clause and the subordinate clause in different colours, just how I did it there. And then I would like you to add the comma to separate the clauses. Remember, a main clause is a sentence that makes sense on its own. The subordinate clause requires the main clause to make sense. So let's have a look at these 5 examples. I'm going to do the first one with you. So let's look at number 1. Although her sister annoyed her at times, Leah loved her very much. Pause the video and just copy number 1 down for me. Then you can press play. Okay, so you should have copied number 1 down. Now, the first step is to highlight the main clause and the subordinate clause in different colours. So I'm going to grab my highlighter. I'm going to highlight my main clauses in, I'm going to highlight my subordinate clause in green. and I'm going to highlight my main clause in yellow. So I'm going to read it out loud to myself. Although her sister annoyed her at times, Leah loved her very much. Leah loved her very much is the main clause there. And the subordinate clause here is although her sister annoyed her at times. Okay, that means I've done step 1, and now I'm going to grab my pen and I'm going to add my comma in between them so I know that they are separated and that they need a pause in the middle. You can pause the video now and you can make sure that number 1 is highlighted, the main clause and the subordinate clause with a comma in the middle, and then you can do the same for numbers 2, 3, 4 and 5. Once you've done that, press play on the video. Okay, if you're back, that means you've completed this task and you're ready to make your purple pen corrections. Give it a tick if you got it right. If you got it wrong, make sure that you do some corrections. So you need to make sure that your main and subordinate clauses are correct. And you also need to add the purple pen comma in the correct place if you got it wrong. So it should look something like this. In these examples, the subordinate clauses are all at the beginning. Due to their excellent behaviour and attendance, due to leaves on the train tracks, before you go to lunch, despite your repeated warnings from the teacher. And then their last section here is the main clause. Leah loved her very much. Year 7 were rewarded a trip to the zoo. All the trains were cancelled. You need to make sure you have finished your work. Sophie still didn't complete her work. And as you can see, as you can see in the middle, they are all separated accurately with a comma there. So yours should look exactly like that. Pause the video and make sure that your sentences in your book look like the ones on screen, please. Okay, if you're back, we're going to have a final recap. Just like the do now, I would like you to read these sentences and copy the sentences that use commas correctly. Remember, we've learnt today that commas are used to separate items in a list, and commas are also used to separate main and subordinate clauses. So, read the 5 sentences on screen and copy the sentences that use commas correctly. Pause the video and press play when you completed that, please. Okay, if you're back, that means you've completed this task. And as always, we're ready to make our corrections. So, cross these sentences out if you haven't got them right, and make sure you write the correct ones in purple pen if you missed them. So, these are the 2 sentences that use commas correctly. Alex bought an apple, 2 bananas, some sugar and a pineapple. Commas are used here to separate the items in the list. Although Gwyneth was very tired, she still completed all her homework. The comma is used here to separate the subordinate clause from the main clause. Pause the video and make any corrections that you need to now, please. Okay, if you're back, that means that you are ready to submit your work. Make sure your email subject looks like this, and make sure that you're following the guidance on screen to submit your work properly. Pause the video and submit your work. Once you've done that, you can X off and move on to your next lesson. I look forward to seeing all of your excellent hard work in my emails.